When the new teacher arrived at the small town, she was filled with hope and excitement. She had always dreamed of making a difference in the lives of children, and this opportunity seemed like a perfect chance to do just that. The town itself was small, with narrow streets lined by old houses and familiar faces. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and things often stayed the same year after year. But despite the small-town charm, there was a quiet undercurrent of frustration. The children in this town had always been taught in a strict and sometimes harsh environment. The town itself wasn't known for its warmth. People were friendly, but there wasn't much compassion. The idea of teaching kindness was seen as an afterthought, a luxury, something that didn't always matter in the real world. The teacher had a different vision, one rooted in kindness and empathy. She believed that kindness wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was essential for creating a better world. She wanted her students to see that kindness wasn't just a simple gesture. It was a powerful tool for making meaningful changes, not just in their own lives, but in the lives of those around them. And though she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she was determined to try. On her first day, she stood in front of her classroom, a small, brightly lit space with rows of desks and colorful posters on the walls. The children sat quietly, eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. They had seen many teachers come and go over the years, each one bringing their own rules and expectations. But kindness? That was new. She began by introducing herself in a warm, friendly tone. She didn't want to come across as just another teacher. They'd seen plenty of those. She shared her passion for teaching, telling the students that she wasn't just there to give them lessons in math or science, but also in life. She wanted to teach them how to be kind to one another, how to listen, how to care. The room was silent at first. The students weren't used to this approach. In their past experiences, teachers had focused mostly on discipline and academic performance. There was little room for softness. Many of the kids came from difficult backgrounds where kindness wasn't always something they experienced at home. They had grown up in a world where people were often too busy to show understanding and compassion, where kindness wasn't a priority. Her words seemed to hang in the air, and the teacher wasn't sure how they would be received. She had no idea how long it would take to break through the walls that many of her students had built around themselves. Some students were skeptical. Some were indifferent. But she wasn't going to give up. She had a plan, and she was going to stick with it. The first lesson she introduced was simple. It's okay to be kind. It was such a basic idea, but she realized that many of the students had never been taught this. They had been taught to compete, to be tough, to always be first. She knew it wouldn't be easy to change these attitudes, but she wasn't ready to back down. The teacher started by encouraging her students to compliment one another. At first, the students hesitated. Compliments weren't something they were used to, especially in a school setting. Many of them looked at each other nervously, unsure of what to say. But after a few awkward moments, something unexpected happened. A student complimented another's shoes. Then a different student praised someone's handwriting. Slowly, the classroom atmosphere began to shift. The compliments didn't stop. They became a regular part of each day, but it wasn't just about the compliments. The teacher also made it a point to show kindness herself. She was patient when students struggled, offering a helping hand without judgment. She showed them that they didn't have to be perfect to deserve kindness. She emphasized the importance of giving second chances, showing that everyone was deserving of respect no matter their mistakes. As the days went by, the students began to soften. They started talking to each other more, helping each other out with homework and tasks. At first, it was small things, picking up books for someone who had dropped them or holding a door open. But these small acts of kindness began to grow. And soon, the students started showing kindness outside the classroom. They helped out at home, in the community, even in the schoolyard. At first, the town itself didn't notice much. It was easy to overlook the small changes happening in the classroom. But gradually, whispers began to spread. People started noticing the children's improved behavior. They noticed the smiles on their faces, the way they helped others without being asked. The teacher's influence was beginning to reach beyond the walls of her classroom. One day, a local shopkeeper mentioned how a group of children had helped clean up after a community event. The teacher had always encouraged her students to volunteer and contribute to the town in any way they could. And this small act of kindness was a reflection of that. It wasn't just about the students being kind to each other anymore. They were starting to extend that kindness to the wider community. But while these changes were encouraging, they weren't without challenges. There were still moments of resistance. Some of the students, especially those who had faced the toughest circumstances, had a harder time accepting the idea of kindness. They were skeptical of a world where people could actually care for one another. For them, kindness had always been something that was used against them. They were used to people turning their backs when things got tough, to being ignored when they needed help. The teacher understood this. She didn't expect everyone to change overnight. She knew that real change took time, especially in a town where the culture was deeply ingrained. But she believed in the power of persistence, of small, consistent efforts that could eventually turn the tide. At the end of her first month, the teacher felt a sense of accomplishment. There was still a long way to go, but the small victories were undeniable. Her students had begun to understand that kindness wasn't just about being nice. It was about creating connections, about making the world a better place, one act at a time. And for the first time, she truly believed that she could make a difference in this town. The days turned into weeks, and the classroom atmosphere continued to evolve. The students were becoming more accustomed to the idea of kindness, though it wasn't always easy. They were used to a world where showing vulnerability could sometimes be seen as a weakness. But here, in the teacher's classroom, that idea was slowly starting to shift. One of the most noticeable changes was how the students began to treat each other. The students who once kept to themselves were now starting to open up. The quiet, withdrawn boy who had rarely spoken in class was now sharing his thoughts more often. He'd started speaking up in group discussions, and while it wasn't always easy for him, it was clear that the teacher's encouragement had helped him find his voice. Another student, who had often been disruptive in class, was now asking to help others. He volunteered to organize the classroom library, helped with cleaning up after lessons, and even began tutoring a few classmates who needed extra help with their work. His transformation was the most surprising, not just to the teacher but to his classmates as well. They had never seen him act this way before. He wasn't just showing kindness in the classroom, he was extending it to everyone around him. The teacher also noticed that the students were starting to hold each other accountable. If someone said something unkind, another student would gently remind them to think before they spoke. It wasn't about shaming anyone. It was about creating a community where everyone looked out for each other. The students had begun to realize that kindness wasn't just about being nice when it was easy. It was about making the effort even when it was hard. Outside the classroom, the changes were even more evident. The students, once known for their rough behavior in the playground, had begun to help one another out. Instead of the usual teasing or arguments, there were now small moments of cooperation. One afternoon, the students organized a game of football, and instead of competing fiercely, they worked together to make sure everyone had a chance to play, no matter their skill level. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of frustration, but the spirit of teamwork was there. One of the most touching moments came when a new student arrived at the school. She was shy and nervous, unsure of what to expect. The teacher had already prepared her students for the arrival, encouraging them to be kind and welcoming to their new classmate. When the girl walked into the room, the entire class greeted her with smiles and friendly words. They made sure she had someone to sit with at lunch, and by the end of the day, she had already made a few new friends. The teacher saw how much her students had grown, and it made her heart swell with pride. But there was still more work to be done. The idea of kindness was spreading, but it needed to go beyond just the classroom. It needed to reach the wider community, and that's when the teacher began to come up with a plan. She decided to introduce a kindness project, one that would involve not just the students but also the people in the town. The idea was simple. Each student would perform one act of kindness every week, and then share their experience with the class. It didn't matter how big or small the act was. It could be as simple as helping a neighbor with groceries or giving a compliment to someone who looked like they were having a rough day. The goal was to create a ripple effect where kindness spread from one person to the next and then to the next. The teacher also encouraged her students to take their acts of kindness home. She asked them to talk to their families about the project and to ask their parents, siblings, and even grandparents to join in. It was important that the students saw that kindness wasn't just something to do at school. It was something that could make a real difference in their lives and in the lives of those around them. At first, some of the students were unsure about the idea. They were used to doing things for themselves, not for others. But as the days went on, more and more students began to participate. They started to feel proud of the kindness they were spreading, and soon the school was buzzing with excitement. The walls of the classroom were covered in colorful posters and drawings, each one representing an act of kindness. Some students wrote about how they helped a friend with their homework, while others shared stories of helping their parents around the house. One of the most heartwarming stories came from a student who had always struggled with fitting in. This student had always been quiet, sitting alone during lunch and rarely interacting with the other children. But one day, this student noticed another child sitting by themselves in the playground. Instead of walking past, they decided to sit down and talk to the lonely child. It wasn't easy, but they remembered the teacher's words. Kindness wasn't always the easiest choice, but it was always the right one. By the end of the week, the two children were sharing lunch together, and the once shy student had made a new friend. The ripple effect continued to grow. More students were helping others, not just within the school, but also in the community. The local grocery store had a box for donations, and the children began bringing in food to help those who were struggling. The teacher had encouraged them to think about others, to ask themselves what they could do to make the world a better place, and the children were responding with enthusiasm. The teacher was amazed at how quickly the town began to change. It wasn't just the students anymore. People from the town were starting to take notice. Local shopkeepers were talking about how much kinder the children had become. Parents were telling her how their kids were now helping at home without being asked. It wasn't just the kids who were changing. The town itself was slowly transforming. The idea of kindness was no longer just something taught in school. It was becoming a way of life. But not everyone was on board. There were still some people in the town who believed that kindness was something unnecessary, something that wouldn't make a real difference. They thought that people should be tough and that kindness was a sign of weakness. The teacher knew that change wouldn't come overnight, and she was ready to face these challenges head on. One day, a town meeting was held to discuss the changes taking place. Some residents voiced their concerns about the focus on kindness. They didn't see how it would make a real impact on the town's problems. But as the meeting went on, more and more people began to share their own stories. A local shopkeeper spoke up, talking about how the children had helped clean up after a community event. A parent shared how their child had helped an elderly neighbor with their groceries. The teacher sat quietly, listening as the community slowly began to understand what she had been trying to show them all along. Kindness wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was a powerful tool for change. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted. People who had once been skeptical were now nodding in agreement. The town was starting to see that kindness was more than just a buzzword. It was a way of life that could change everything. As the weeks passed, the teacher felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her students were no longer just learning about kindness, they were living it. And in doing so, they were changing not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. As the days turned into months, the changes in the town became more and more apparent. The once quiet, reserved community was now filled with a new energy, one driven by kindness. The children, having embraced their teacher's lessons, were continuing to spread good deeds far beyond the classroom. But even with the growing success of the Kindness Project, the teacher knew that sustaining this change would take time and effort. The teacher had never been one to seek recognition for her work, but the ripple effect she had started was undeniable. It wasn't just the students who were changing. The entire town was slowly becoming more connected, more compassionate, and more open to the idea of community. But it wasn't always easy. There were days when the teacher felt the weight of the challenge on her shoulders. She had started something big, and with that came resistance, especially from those who had lived in the town for years and believed that things should stay the way they always had been. They didn't see the value in kindness, thinking it was simply a passing phase. They believed that in the end, the world didn't operate on kindness. It operated on results, on hard work, on competition. To them, kindness seemed like a soft, unnecessary trait. One of the most noticeable shifts occurred during a local town fair. Every year, the fair was a major event, and it was always full of excitement, competition, and high-energy contests. It was a day when people from all over the town came together to showcase their skills and talents. For years, the fair had been a reflection of the town's competitive nature. There was always a first-place winner, a second-place winner, and sometimes even a third-place winner. But this year, something was different. For the first time, the fair was being organized by the children of the school. The teacher had worked with them to create an event that was centered around kindness, community, and cooperation. Instead of focusing on who was the best, the students focused on creating activities that everyone could enjoy together. The fair included games where people worked as teams, like a three-legged race and challenges that encouraged people to help one another, like a relay race where each person had to pass a gift to the next. There were also stations where people could donate food or toys to local charities, and an area where children could write letters of appreciation for teachers, parents, and others who made a positive difference in their lives. At first, some of the adults were skeptical. "This is a fair, not a charity event," they grumbled. "People want to have fun, not just help others." But the children were undeterred. They had been working hard for weeks to prepare for this, and they were determined to show their community that kindness could be just as fun as competition. On the day of the fair, the entire town turned out to participate. The morning started off with some hesitation, but as the events progressed, something remarkable happened. People began to see the value in what the children had created. Adults, once focused on winning and competing, were now laughing and cheering each other on. There was an air of camaraderie that hadn't been felt in the town for years. The highlight of the day came when everyone gathered in the town square to listen to a speech given by the teacher. She stood before the crowd looking out at the many faces that had gathered in support of the fair. With a smile, she began speaking about the power of kindness and how it could change the world, one small act at a time. Her words resonated with the crowd, many of whom had seen firsthand the transformation the children had gone through. "We don't always need to be the best at everything," she said. "What truly matters is how we treat each other, how we lift one another up. Kindness is a gift we can give to everyone, and it's the one thing that costs nothing but can change everything." As she finished her speech, the crowd erupted in applause. The adults who had once doubted the power of kindness were now standing and clapping, their hearts touched by the message. That day, the town learned something they hadn't realized they were missing, a sense of togetherness that transcended competition. It wasn't about being the best or winning. It was about showing up for each other, supporting one another, and working as a team. After the fair, the changes in the town became even more noticeable. The school continued to thrive, with the children leading by example. They continued performing acts of kindness at home, at school, and in the community. There were more charitable events, more volunteer opportunities, and more ways for people to get involved. The town began to build a stronger sense of community. People started reaching out to help their neighbors, whether it was by offering a helping hand with yard work or taking care of an elderly resident who needed assistance with grocery shopping. The small acts of kindness were no longer isolated to just the children or the school. They were happening everywhere. Yet despite these positive changes, the teacher knew that some challenges would still remain. Not everyone in the town had embraced kindness in the same way, and there were still some who found it difficult to believe that things could really change. Some were still set in their ways, clinging to the idea that kindness was a fleeting concept, a trend that would fade away over time. The teacher had learned to be patient. She knew that true change didn't happen overnight. She had seen how difficult it could be to overcome years of old habits and mindsets, but she also knew that each small act of kindness, each person who embraced the idea, was helping to create something bigger than herself. She was part of something that was much more powerful than anyone. Individual. She was part of a movement that was changing a town, one act of kindness at a time. As the months went by, the teacher's relationship with her students grew even stronger. She had seen them evolve from hesitant and skeptical children to confident young people who understood the importance of empathy and compassion. They had learned that kindness wasn't just about being nice, it was about creating a world where everyone was seen, heard, and valued. In return, the students began to teach their families what they had learned. Parents who had once been skeptical of the kindness movement started to adopt it in their own lives. Families would spend time together volunteering, sharing stories of kindness with one another, and making sure that no one in the community felt forgotten. The teacher's work was far from over, But she knew that the seeds of kindness had been planted, and with each passing day, those seeds were growing into something beautiful. As time went on, the impact of the kindness movement grew deeper and more widespread. The teacher watched as her students continued to shine with the light of empathy, compassion, and care. The children were becoming true ambassadors of kindness, and their actions were inspiring not only their peers but the adults around them. The small town, once known for its quiet and sometimes cold atmosphere, was slowly transforming. What had started as a simple lesson about kindness had become the backbone of a new culture. It wasn't about grand gestures or flashy displays of good deeds. Instead, it was about the small, everyday actions that showed care for one another. One afternoon, as the teacher sat in her classroom, she saw something that filled her with pride. A group of students had gathered around a classmate who was sitting alone in the corner, looking down. The teacher had taught them about the importance of noticing when someone needed help, and today her lesson was coming to life. Without being prompted, a few of the students had noticed their peer's sadness and had gone over to comfort him. It wasn't just about words, it was about actions. They didn't ask him to share what was wrong, nor did they pressure him to talk. Instead, they sat next to him, offered him a smile, and simply let him know that he wasn't alone. A simple gesture, yet it was profound. The classmate who had once kept to himself, always on the fringes, was now a part of the group. His smile, though small, was enough to show that he was grateful. The teacher could see how much this meant to him. She had been teaching her students about the power of empathy, but today they had shown it in the purest form. The transformation in this student was something she had hoped for but never expected to see so quickly. It wasn't just about learning the lessons in the classroom. It was about living them in the real world. As the weeks passed, the teacher began to see even more changes in the students. They had developed a stronger sense of community, not just within the classroom but beyond the school walls. The children had begun to reach out to others in the town, offering their help and kindness in ways that she had never imagined. One day, a local business owner approached the teacher with a request. He had noticed that the children in the town were becoming more helpful, more respectful, and more engaged with the community. He wanted to reward their efforts by offering free classes on entrepreneurship and small business skills. He believed that the kindness and work ethic the students were showing would make them great leaders in the future. This gesture was a sign of how far the town had come. The idea of kindness had grown beyond the walls of the school and into the hearts of the town's people. The teacher had never expected such an opportunity to arise, but now, it seemed that the kindness movement was starting to shape the future of the town in ways that no one had anticipated. The teacher knew that it wasn't just about teaching kindness. It was about creating a cycle that would continue long after she had left the classroom. The children had become leaders in their own right. They weren't just following her example. They were taking the lessons they had learned and passing them on to others. The cycle of kindness was growing stronger, with each child helping the next and the next until the entire town was caught in its web. But, as with any great change, there were still moments of resistance. Some adults in the town had begun to question the long-term effects of this new way of living. They worried that kindness would make their children too soft, that it would make them less competitive, less prepared for the harsh realities of the world. The teacher understood their concerns. She had heard similar thoughts from other communities that had attempted to embrace kindness in the past. There was always the fear that kindness would be seen as a weakness, that people would take advantage of those who were too giving. But the teacher believed that kindness wasn't about being weak. It was about being strong enough to show empathy and understanding, even when it was difficult. She believed that true strength came from building connections with others, not from shutting people out. She decided that it was time to address these concerns. At the next town meeting, she stood in front of the crowd and spoke about her vision for the future. She acknowledged the concerns of the adults, explaining that kindness didn't mean avoiding hard work or competition. It meant creating a balance where people could thrive together, rather than at the expense of one another. Kindness isn't about being soft or weak, she told them. It's about building a community where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. It's about understanding that competition isn't the only way to measure success. Success is about how we support each other, how we lift each other up, and how we make sure that no one is left behind. Her words were powerful, and for the first time, The adults in the room began to understand that kindness wasn't something that would hinder their children. It was something that would empower them. It was a lesson in collaboration, in teamwork, in building a better future for everyone. By the end of the meeting, many of the adults had changed their perspective. They saw that kindness was not a threat to their town's progress, but a tool for creating a stronger, more united community. It wasn't about giving up ambition or competition. It was about realizing that the real measure of success was how much we helped each other along the way. In the weeks that followed, the teacher continued to see the results of the kindness movement in action. More businesses in town started offering to help the children with internships, job opportunities, and mentorship. The local library held events where the children could come and read to younger kids. Parents began to volunteer at local shelters, and the children helped organize food drives and charity events. The transformation in the town was undeniable. The sense of community had grown stronger, and it was now a place where people looked out for one another, where kindness wasn't just a lesson taught in school, it was a way of life. And at the heart of it all was the teacher, who had sparked a change that no one had ever imagined. As the school year came to a close, the teacher reflected on how far the town had come. It had been a journey of challenges and setbacks, but also one of incredible growth and transformation. The teacher had not just changed the lives of her students, she had helped change the entire town. The children who had once been skeptical of kindness had now become its greatest champions. They had learned that kindness wasn't just about making the world a better place. It was about making their own lives richer, more fulfilling, and more connected to others. And as the teacher prepared to move on to her next chapter, she knew that the legacy of kindness would continue to thrive, long after she had left. As the end of the school year drew near, the teacher couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. She had seen so much growth in her students and in the town. The transformation was real. The community had embraced kindness in a way that no one could have imagined when she first walked into that classroom months ago. But now, with the school year coming to a close, she found herself wondering how far the changes would go and whether they would last beyond her time at the school. The students were different, more open, more thoughtful, and more connected. They had become leaders in their own right, showing kindness to everyone around them. They had learned that kindness wasn't just about being nice when it was convenient. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt supported, valued, and cared for, even when things weren't easy. The teacher had taught them well, but now she had to let go. The time had come for her to move on, to take on new challenges in a different place. It was a bittersweet moment, one filled with pride but also sadness. She knew that she had made a difference, but she couldn't help but wonder if the changes she had sparked would continue to grow after she was gone. On her last day at school, the students gathered around her, each of them holding something they had made, a card, a small gift, or a note expressing their gratitude. There were smiles and hugs, but there was also a sense of quiet understanding. They knew that they had learned something important. The teacher had given them more than just academic lessons. She had taught them how to be kind, how to connect with others, and how to make the world a better place. One of the students, who had once been one of the most reserved in the class, stood up and spoke. He had become one of the teacher's strongest supporters, helping others and sharing the lessons he had learned. With a nervous but determined voice, he said, "You taught us that kindness is something we can choose every day. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. You showed us that we can make a difference, and we will keep doing that." The words of that student stayed with the teacher long after the school bell rang, signaling the end of her time with them. She had done what she set out to do. The town had changed, the students had changed, and in the process she had changed too. She had come to this town as an outsider, unsure of what to expect, but now she was leaving behind a community that had embraced her vision and made it their own. The teacher took one last look at the classroom before she walked out the door. The walls were still decorated with the colorful posters and drawings the students had created, each one representing an act of kindness. It was a small thing, but it was a reminder of how much had changed. This room, once just a place for lessons, had become a space for growth, empathy, and connection. And now, it was time for her to step into the next chapter of her life. Knowing that her work here was far from finished, it would live on through the students she had taught. As she left the school and stepped into the bright sunlight, she noticed the town felt different. It was no longer a place of quiet indifference, but a town that was alive with a new sense of purpose. People smiled at each other more often, greeted one another with warmth, and stopped to help when someone was in need. The change wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The teacher didn't have to be there to see the final results. She knew that the seeds of kindness she had planted had taken root and would continue to grow. The students would carry the lessons they had learned with them, and as they grew, they would pass those lessons on to others. The kindness movement would continue to spread, quietly but steadily, touching more lives than anyone could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, the teacher received letters and messages from former students and community members, sharing stories of how the lessons of kindness had continued to shape their lives. One former student, now in high school, wrote about how she had started a kindness club at her school, where students worked together to organize events to help the community. Another letter came from a parent who shared how their child had helped an elderly neighbor with chores without being asked. There were even messages from local business owners, who spoke about how the children had brought a new sense of cooperation and respect to the workplace. The teacher was proud of all that had been accomplished, but she also knew that the town's journey wasn't over. Kindness, she realized, was not a destination. It was a process, something that needed to be nurtured and cared for every day. It would take time for the full effects to be realized, and even then there would always be room for more growth. But that was the beauty of it. Kindness didn't have an end point. It was something that could be practiced again and again, always evolving and expanding. As the years went on, the town continued to change. It became known for its strong sense of community, where people supported one another, helped each other in times of need, and celebrated each other's successes. Visitors often remarked on the kindness of the town's residents, marveling at the sense of belonging that filled the streets. And though the teacher had moved on to other places, she would always remember this town, the children who had embraced her lessons, and the community that had opened its heart to the idea of kindness. The impact of her work wasn't measured by the awards she received or the recognition she garnered. It was measured by the changes she had made in the lives of the people she had touched. The teacher often thought back to the first day she arrived in the town, unsure of what to expect and how she had found not just a group of students, but a community that was ready to change. She had started with the simple idea that kindness could make a difference, and she had been proven right. The town was living proof that kindness was more than just a word. It was a way of life, one that could transform the world, one small act at a time. As she looked back on everything she had accomplished, the teacher felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had done what she set out to do. She had taught her students the most important lesson of all, that kindness, though sometimes overlooked, was the key to creating a better, more connected world. And that, she knew, would be her lasting legacy. As the seasons passed, the ripple effect of kindness continued to spread. What had started as a simple idea, one that seemed so small at the time, had now become a cornerstone of the town's identity. The children who had once hesitated to show kindness were now leading by example, inspiring those around them, and their actions were changing lives in ways that were both visible and subtle. The teacher, now far from the town, still heard about the ongoing impact of her work. Former students wrote letters, shared stories, and posted updates on social media. These messages, simple as they were, filled her heart with pride. The town was thriving, and kindness had become a way of life. People were helping each other in ways they never had before. It wasn't just about grand gestures anymore. It was about the small everyday acts that made the biggest difference. One letter came from a former student who had gone on to high school. The letter described how the kindness lessons had changed his life. He talked about how he had started a group at his high school focused on making sure that no one ever felt left out. He and his friends organized lunch gatherings for students who didn't have anyone to sit with, and they had created a buddy system for those who needed support. I never realized how important small acts of kindness were until I started putting them into practice, he wrote. You taught us that kindness doesn't just change others, it changes us too. I feel like I'm making a difference just like you did for me. The teacher smiled as she read these words. She had always known that kindness could transform lives, but seeing it spread from one small classroom to the wider world was a dream come true. She had given her students the tools to make the world a better place, and they were using those tools to build something lasting and meaningful. In another letter, a parent shared how their child had taken the lessons of kindness beyond the school and into their family. The child had become a mediator during arguments between siblings, encouraging them to listen to each other and resolve conflicts peacefully. The parent had never seen this kind of behavior before. "I didn't know how to teach my children to be kind to each other," the parent wrote. "But your lessons helped me realize that it's not about giving them the answers. It's about teaching them how to treat others with respect and love." The teacher had always believed that kindness wasn't something you could teach in isolation. It wasn't enough to show children how to be kind in a classroom setting and expect them to apply it only there. Kindness had to become a part of who they were, something they carried with them wherever they went. And from what she was hearing, it was clear that her students had internalized these lessons and were living them out in every part of their lives. The town, too, had changed. It was no longer just a place where people lived side by side, but a community where people truly cared for one another. It had taken time, but the transformation had been profound. Neighbors helped neighbors without being asked. Local businesses offered discounts to families in need. The school became a hub of community activity, with students, teachers, and parents working together to create events that benefited everyone. The town had become a place where kindness wasn't an exception, it was the rule. And while the teacher had played a key role in sparking this change, she knew that it was the people of the town who had made it happen. They had taken the lessons she had taught them and made them their own. They had shown that kindness wasn't just something you do for a day or a week, it was something you live every day and every moment. There were still challenges, of course. Not every day was filled with smiles and kindness. There were moments of conflict, of frustration, and of misunderstanding. But the difference now was that people knew how to handle those challenges with empathy and respect. When someone made a mistake, they were given the benefit of the doubt and a second chance. When there was tension, people took the time to talk it out, to listen and to understand. The community was stronger because of it. The teacher's heart swelled with pride as she thought about everything that had happened. She had come to this town as a stranger, unsure of what to expect. She had hoped that she could make a difference, but she never imagined that she would be a part of something so much bigger than herself. The kindness movement had become a living, breathing thing, something that was no longer just about her. It was about all the people who had embraced it and made it their own. Years later, the teacher returned to the town for a visit. She had heard so much about the ongoing changes, and she wanted to see it for herself. When she arrived, she was greeted with warmth and joy. Former students, now adults, approached her with smiles and hugs, thanking her for the impact she had made on their lives. It was a reunion filled with gratitude and recognition, but what struck her most was how much the town had grown. It was the same place, yet it felt completely different. She visited the school and saw the children who had followed in her students' footsteps. They were just like the students she had taught years ago, eager to make a difference in the world. She watched as they helped each other with schoolwork, organized charity events, and worked together to create a community mural celebrating kindness. They were continuing the work that had started so many years before, and it was clear that the lessons of kindness had taken root in a way that would last for generations. At the end of her visit, the teacher stood before a crowd of former students, current students, and community members. They had gathered to thank her, but as she looked out at the crowd, she realized that the real thanks belonged to them. They were the ones who had made the change happen. They had taken her lessons and turned them into something more. They had made kindness not just a lesson, but a way of life. "I came here hoping to teach you something," the teacher said, her voice filled with emotion. "But you've taught me so much more. You've shown me that kindness isn't just something we practice when it's convenient. It's something we choose every single day. You've shown me that a small act of kindness can change the world, and that change starts with us." The crowd erupted into applause, and the teacher felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had given her students the gift of kindness, but they had given her something even more precious, a reminder that kindness was a force stronger than anything else in the world. It had the power to heal, to bring people together, and to create lasting change. As she left the town once again, the teacher knew that the work she had started would continue. The community had embraced kindness in a way that was now ingrained in their culture. It wasn't just a movement anymore, it was a way of life. And as long as there were people who believed in the power of kindness, that legacy would live on, spreading from one generation to the next. The teacher had come to the town with a simple idea, and in the end, she had helped create something extraordinary. She had planted the seed of kindness, and in return, she had witnessed the growth of a community that would carry that seed with them for the rest of their lives. Years passed, and the town continued to thrive. What had begun as a quiet, seemingly ordinary place had transformed into a vibrant community, one built on compassion, empathy, and kindness. People often spoke of how things had changed, but the change itself wasn't something that could easily be pinned down. It wasn't a single event, but a series of small, meaningful actions that slowly added up, creating something bigger than anyone had imagined. The children who had been part of the kindness movement were now adults, and they carried the lessons they had learned into their own families, jobs, and communities. Many had become leaders in their own right, working to spread the same values that had shaped them when they were young. It was no longer unusual to see a group of neighbors gathering together to help clean up after a storm, or a group of teenagers volunteering at the local food bank. What had once been a simple lesson had now become a way of life. One particular story stood out to the teacher, who had long since moved on from the town, but still kept in touch with many of her former students. She had received a message from one of her former students who had gone on to become a teacher herself. This student had taken the lessons she had learned and was now applying them in her own classroom. It wasn't just about teaching reading or math. It was about creating a safe, supportive environment where children could grow emotionally and socially, just as she had. In her message, the former student wrote, "I teach my students the same way you taught me. I remind them every day that kindness is not just about being polite or saying the right words. It's about listening, understanding, and being there for others, especially when it's hard. I can see the difference it's making in their lives just as it made a difference in mine." Reading this, the teacher felt a sense of pride that was hard to put into words. She had set out to change the lives of her students, but in the end, they had gone on to change the lives of others, creating a ripple effect that would continue for generations to come. The kindness movement, which had started as a simple idea, was now embedded in the very fabric of the town. And beyond that, it had spread to schools, workplaces, and homes across the region. One day, the teacher received an invitation to return to the town for a special event. The local school had decided to hold an annual Kindness Day in her honor. It was a day for the entire community to come together and celebrate the values of empathy, respect, and kindness. The event included activities like helping out at local charities, organizing community cleanups, and most importantly, sharing stories of kindness that had made a difference in people's lives. The teacher was humbled by the invitation. She had always believed that kindness was not something to be celebrated, but something to be lived every day. Yet she understood the power of such an event that not only honored the lessons she had taught, but also highlighted the ongoing work of every person in the community who had embraced the idea. When the teacher arrived in the town, she was greeted by familiar faces, some of her former students now grown up, with children of their own. There was a sense of joy in the air, a feeling that something special was taking place. As she walked through the town square, she couldn't help but notice how much had changed. The buildings were the same, but everything felt different. People were smiling at each other as they worked together, exchanging words of encouragement and support. It was clear that kindness was no longer an ideal to strive for. It was a living, breathing part of the town's culture. At the event, the teacher stood in front of a large crowd, both nervous and honored by the attention. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but she understood the importance of the day. It was a celebration not just of her, but of everyone who had taken part in the kindness movement. "I didn't come here to be celebrated," she began, looking out at the crowd. "I came here to say thank you. Thank you to all of you for making kindness something that we live, not just something we talk about. You are the ones who made this town what it is today. You are the ones who carry the torch of kindness forward. And you are the ones who are showing the world that compassion, empathy, and respect can change everything." Her voice wavered slightly as she spoke, but the crowd was silent, hanging on every word. She could see the faces of her former students, now adults with families of their own, nodding in agreement. They had embraced her lessons and turned them into something more. They had made kindness not just a lesson, but a way of life, and now they were passing it on to the next generation. After the speech, the community gathered for a celebration. It wasn't just about the teacher. It was about all the people who had worked together to build something bigger than themselves. The town was no longer just a place on a map. It was a living example of what was possible when people came together with a shared purpose. It was a place where kindness wasn't just an idea, it was a reality. As the day came to an end, the teacher reflected on all that had been accomplished. The town had come a long way, and while she had played a part in that transformation, it was the people of the town who had made it possible. They had taken the lessons of kindness and woven them into the very fabric of their lives. They had shown that kindness wasn't just about being nice. It was about creating a community where everyone had the opportunity to thrive, where everyone felt seen and heard. The teacher knew that her time in this town had come to an end. She had done what she had set out to do, and now it was up to the people of the town to continue the work. But as she left the town once again, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had helped create something lasting. The seeds of kindness had been planted, and they were growing into something beautiful. As the teacher drove away, she thought about all the people she had met along the way, students, parents, neighbors, and strangers who had opened their hearts to the idea of kindness. She thought about how each small act of kindness, no matter how simple, had rippled out into the world and made a difference, and she knew that in some small way, she had helped to change the world. The teacher had come to the town as a stranger, unsure of what would happen, but she had left with a heart full of gratitude, knowing that kindness had the power to transform not just a community, but the entire world. She had learned that kindness wasn't just a gift, it was a way of life, a way that people could choose every day to make the world a better place.